right, today we're going to dive into a totally new frontier in AI, one that's learning to read what is, let's be honest, the most important story out there, your health journey. We're going to break down a really fascinating model called COMET. And the key thing here is it's not just about looking at your past medical history, it's about trying to predict what could come next. Okay, so let's kick things off with a problem that, if you've ever been to a doctor, or hey, if you are a doctor, you are going to recognize this instantly. It's that classic hand on the doorknob moment. The appointment's pretty much over, the doctor's about to leave, and that's when the real question comes out. It's such a simple but super frustrating moment, and it really shines a light on this huge communication gap in healthcare that technology is now finally trying to solve. So let's talk about the patient's story. The big question is, why is this so hard? Well, at the very heart of this research is a simple fact. A patient's health record isn't just a file. It's a long, complicated, and often fragmented story. Trying to make sense of years of visits, lab tests, and different medications is frankly a huge administrative headache for clinicians. It makes seeing the whole picture incredibly tough. Yeah, just think about it for a second. This story is made up of all these different pieces: diagnoses, lab results, medications. And what's really crucial, the time that passes between all those events. Every single piece is a clue. But trying to manually connect all those dots across, say, a decade of data, that's next to impossible for a human to do on the fly. It's a narrative, a really complex one. And the challenge is teaching a computer how to read it. And that leads to the big what if, right? What if an AI could actually read this entire messy story and maybe even help write the next chapter? So this is the puzzle researchers are trying to solve. Can they build an AI that goes beyond just understanding, normal human language scraped from the internet, and instead learns to speak the unique, incredibly complex language of healthcare? And that brings us to our next section, a new language model. This is where we meet COMET. It's a new kind of AI called a medical event foundation model. It was developed by researchers over at Epic and Microsoft, and it was trained on an absolutely massive, de-identified dataset called Epic Cosmos. So let's dig into the methodology. Okay, before we go any further, let's just make sure we're on the same page with this term foundation model. Think of it like this. Instead of teaching an AI to do one very, very specific thing, you train it on a mountain of data so it learns the fundamental rules of a whole subject. It's like learning all the basics of physics before you decide to specialize. You build this incredibly broad, strong base of knowledge first, and then you can apply it to all sorts of different problems. Now, this right here is the absolute key to understanding what makes COMET so different. On the one hand, you have your typical language models, right? They've read the entire internet, Reddit threads and all, to get really good at predicting the next word in a sentence. But COMET, it's playing a completely different game. It learns to predict the next medical event in your health timeline. The words it's learning are diagnoses, lab results, and medications, all pulled from millions of real anonymous patient stories. And when we talk about the scale here, just look at this number, 115 billion with a B. That is how many individual medical events this model was trained on, all pulled from over 118 million patient records. It's just a mind-boggling amount of data. And that is exactly why it's able to spot these incredibly subtle patterns in how our health journeys unfold over time. So how does this whole thing actually work? Let's walk through it. First, it takes a patient's entire medical history and chops it up into a long sequence of digital tokens. Then, it starts playing a game of what comes next. Over and over, it tries to predict the very next medical event in the sequence. Now, here's where it gets really cool. When it's time to actually make a prediction for a real patient, it doesn't just give one answer. It runs thousands of simulations of what could happen next, a whole set of possible futures. And finally, it looks at all of those simulations and crunches the numbers to calculate the real-world probability of things like developing a disease or needing to go back to the hospital. Okay, so the model's all trained up. Now it's time for the big test. Time to look at the results. And really, the question everyone wants to know is this. Can this one huge generalist model perform as well as, or maybe even better than, a bunch of smaller specialized AI models that were custom-built to predict just one single thing? And honestly, the results are pretty stunning. What you're looking at here is a showdown. It's the big version of COMET versus those specialized models. The higher bars mean COMET was more accurate. And you can see it often matched or just flat out outperformed them at predicting things like diabetes outcomes and hospital readmissions. And the really wild part, it did all of this without any specific training for those individual tasks. It just knew. And hey, Don't just take my word for it. The researchers themselves pointed this out. For a general foundation model, right out of the box, to beat these bespoke, handcrafted models, that is a huge deal. It strongly suggests that learning the broad underlying patterns of patient journeys is a much more powerful and flexible approach.
Now, check this out, because this is one of the most exciting potential applications: early diagnosis. For a disease as serious as pancreatic cancer, the model correctly flagged over half of the at-risk patients, weeks or even months before their official diagnosis. And those numbers on the right, the AUC-ROC scores, that's just a technical way of saying how good the model is at telling who will get the disease from who won't. And believe me, those are very, very strong scores.
But as promising as all of this sounds, we gotta have a reality check. There is a huge gap between a powerful research model and a reliable, trustworthy tool that a doctor can actually use with patients. So a crucial part of any critical review is to really understand the limitations here. And to their credit, the researchers are really upfront about the model's weak spots. For starters, it has blinders on. It only sees data from within its own network. Go to a doctor outside that system, and the AI is completely in the dark. It also simplifies some data, like putting lab results into general buckets, so you lose a little precision. And if you have a really long medical history, the earliest parts just get cut off. But honestly, the biggest hurdle of all is that building real, trustworthy software requires so much more than just a clever algorithm. You need safety guardrails, constant monitoring, and all sorts of controls. So, with all those limitations in mind, let's look forward a bit. Let's talk about the potential, the perfect doctor's visit. How could a technology like this actually change your experience at the clinic? What's the ultimate goal here? So imagine this for a second. Before your appointment, you just hop on the patient portal and have a quick chat with an AI assistant about what's on your mind. That AI then takes your conversation, combines it with your entire medical record, and creates a super smart agenda for the doctor. So when you walk into the exam room, the doctor already knows your main concerns. That hand on the doorknob question, it gets asked first. And after the visit, the AI helps generate a clear, simple action plan just for you. You see, the ultimate goal here isn't just about prediction. It's about leveling the playing field. It's about reducing that information gap, where the doctor knows a bunch of stuff and you, the patient, know a bunch of other stuff. The idea is to get you and your doctor on the exact same page, armed with the best possible information. It completely bridges that communication gap that we started with. Now look, this technology is still really early, for sure, but it forces us to ask a really powerful question. If you could completely redesign your interactions with the healthcare system from the ground up, what would your perfect doctor's visit actually look like? Because the answer to that question might just be a little bit closer than we think.